Neither are my ways your ways, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain cometh down, and the snow from heaven, and returneth not thither, but watereth the earth, and maketh it bring forth in bud, that it may give seed to the sower, and bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth, and it shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and shall prosper to the thing whereto I send it. God mentions the fact that his ways are not our ways. His way of doing things, his way of thinking isn't like ours. And we're going to see that today when we take a look at Genesis. We need to remember that just because somebody has an idea and a plan they're working to, God may allow that thing for completely different reasons. Absolutely, completely different reasons, but God allows it because he's working his own plan out. Let's go over to Genesis chapter 37. And we're going to begin in verse number 1. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought to his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that the father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. Now, first thing about Joseph is he wasn't even the baby of the family, but he was at a time when apparently Jacob thought he wasn't going to be able to have any more kids. He was the son of his old age. He still had one other son younger than him. Benjamin was younger than him. But Joseph was special to him, so he made him this coat of many colors. And so he showered such favoritism on him that his brothers hated him. Absolutely couldn't stand being around him. And I've seen that happen in other families where the baby, even in my own family, I remember my sisters used to complain about how my father was apparently, and I don't know because I wasn't around, so strict when they were my age, and they were always telling me, Dad would never let us do that when we were your age. I'm like, I don't know, I just asked and he said yes. So Joseph didn't do anything wrong, but you hear the hatred of his brothers because he was in a favored position. Now, reading verse 5. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet more. And he said unto them, Here I pray you, the dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheep. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. So you have Joseph here, and he's just, hey, I had a really weird dream last night. Another dream. Talking about how, and we're familiar with the story, about how Joseph dreamed that his brothers and his mother and father would bow down to him. Now remember, God's setting this up and allowing all this, even though his brothers aren't acting out of godly kindness, they're not acting out of righteousness, they're acting purely out of jealousy, out of spite. Verse number 12. And his brethren went to feed the father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here am I. Now, we're going to skip down verse number 28. The brethren were going to slay him. They didn't. But they threw him in a pit. In verse number 28, then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph from out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. Now remember, how old was Joseph when this happened? 17. Okay? So they sold him as a slave in Israel. We're going to skip chapter 38 because that's a side story with Judah. Go to chapter 39, verse number 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him out of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down hither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. Now, that also always kind of thought me as funny. The Lord was with Joseph. You know, my thoughts would be, if the Lord was with me, I wouldn't have been sold into slavery. If the Lord was really with me, none of this would have happened to me. He wouldn't have made me dream a dream that got all my brothers mad at me and had me sold as a slave. But it says the Lord was with Joseph, and he was. And the master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of his house, over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that the master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath into my hand. There is none greater in his house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie with her, or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men in the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. Now, just as a side note, that should always be our response to sin. We should actually say, you know, when temptation comes, we should be running to God. I got to get away from it, whatever this thing is. All too often, you know, the New Testament says, make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. All too often, we don't want to follow Joseph's example. We don't want to, we want to just, oh, let's skirt the line. Let's see how close I can get without crossing over. That wasn't Joseph's mindset. I'm getting out of here. I'm not going to stick around here anymore. I'm not going to do this. But you might think Joseph's mindset would have been, man, I can't believe this. First I'm sold into slavery and things kind of turned a little bit good for me, and now this is going on, but it's about to get worse. Let's keep reading. And it came to pass, when she saw that he left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us, to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her, until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant, whom thou hast brought unto us, came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled, and Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. Now again, Joseph's gone from bad to worse. Joseph is sitting there, what in the world, Lord? I'm doing what's right. I'm trying to avoid sin. I'm trying to make sure I'm doing it right by my master and by you, because he realized the sin was against God. But we're going to see what God's plan is here. Remember, God's ways are not our ways. His ways are not like what we think. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, gave favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it prosper. Now, we're not going to read the next part just for time's sake, but we know the story. He's sitting there in the prison, and two prisoners come. The baker and the butler. And they're sitting here, and they have dreams. And the butler says, hey, I dreamed this dream with these grapes, and I'm crushing them, and there's this cup. And the baker says, well, I have these dreams with the baskets and the bread. And Joseph says, you know what? Butler, you're going to be squeezing the cup. You're going to be handing the cup back to Pharaoh in 3 days. You're going to be restored to your position. So the baker's like, okay, this is going to be good for me too then. Joseph said, not so fast. You're going to be hanged in 3 days. Sure enough, 3 days later, exactly as Joseph had interpreted the dreams, it happened. Then Joseph had told the butler, said, hey, remember me. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be here. This isn't right that I'm even here. I was twice wrong. I was wrong by my brothers and wrong by my master. But then it was wrong by the butler because the butler forgot him. He spent 2 more years in the prison. At this point, Pharaoh dreamed a dream. Genesis chapter number 40. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt, that's 41. And it came to pass at the end of 2 years, 2 full years, that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river, and behold, there came out of the river 7 well-favored kine, and fat-fleshed, and they fed the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came out after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river, and the ill-favored and fat-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and beheld 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind sprang up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, and there was none who could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. And goes on and saying, hey, there was this Hebrew boy when I was in prison, and he correctly interpreted our dreams to us, both mine and the chief baker, and told us exactly what's going to happen, and I forgot all about him. Now, just quickly, turn over to Genesis 41:46. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So how many years had Joseph spent in slavery? 13. So Jenna, just think about it for a minute. Your entire life, he spent in slavery for doing absolutely his father went to his brethren, and they threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery. He tried to do right by his master and refused to lie with his wife, and she lied about him and got him thrown in prison. He interpreted the dreams, and they forgot about him. And finally Pharaoh dreamed, and they put Joseph in charge. We know the story. They put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. Let's go to chapter 45. Because this is the part I really wanted to get to. Verse number 1 says, Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him. Now, we know his brothers had come into Egypt to buy food because of the famine that Joseph had predicted when he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. All of them stood by him, and he cried, Cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud. The Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve your posterity on the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Joseph understood that God's ways were not ours. Because we would have thought, hey, this isn't right, this shouldn't be happening to me. But Joseph understood that God had a plan from the beginning. God allowed him to be sold into slavery. God allowed him to be thrown into prison. 13 years as a slave so he could deliver his brethren and his family. See, God's ways aren't ours. Let's go over to Isaiah 53. See, this constantly causes a problem because we set our expectations on God, thinking he's going to act a certain way, and when he doesn't, we get mad at him or we tend to lose trust in him. Verse number 1, Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty in him that we should desire him. And we know it's talking about Christ, but we would expect the King of all glory, to come like Saul was, well-favored and beautiful. But here it says, no, it wasn't the case. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. We didn't see any value in him. The things that we don't see any value in Joseph's case, slavery. In Joseph's case, being mistreated. Look what this keep going. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him smitten of God, stricken, smitten of God, afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with the stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, because there was he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. We would consider that point, now we know about the resurrection, but in our normal way of thinking, we would consider that a failure. But look what God's ways were. God's ways were to let Joseph go through all these different things to to be able to save the nation of Israel, to save the people. And he blessed Potiphar's house while he was there, blessed the nation of Egypt while he was there, and used Joseph to do it in order to save Israel. Here he let Christ be beaten, crucified. Look what it says next. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. It pleased the Lord to bruise Christ. Let Christ go through all those different things that he didn't deserve. He didn't deserve to take my sin. But it pleased the Lord to do it, because that way he could offer salvation to me and to you. It pleased the Lord to bruise him. It pleased the Lord to let him go through things we wouldn't think would be right, would be normal, would be acceptable, because his ways aren't like our ways. He always looks toward the long end. Remember Isaiah 55 where we started. We're going to turn to Romans in just a second, but just flip back over since we're there. And look again what it says. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him. And to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. And then talks about the word of God. Bringing rain down and accomplishing the purpose. What's the purpose? To get the wicked away from his sin. To turn the unrighteous back to God. That's his purpose. That's always been his purpose. Over Romans. That's been his purpose since Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. Start verse 26. All too often when you start verse 28, we forget the context. It says, likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that uttereth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession to the saints according to the will of God. So we don't know what we're supposed to pray for, because we don't think like God does. So the Spirit will make intercession for us according to the will of God. And we know that all things, verse 28, work together for good. To them that love God, to them are the called according to his purpose, for whom he did foreknow. He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that it might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called. And whom he called, them he also justified. And whom he justified, them he also glorified. What's God's purpose?
To save us.
To save us, but
To glorify Christ.
to make us like Christ. To make us into his image. To turn us from the sinners that we are, to redeem us, and then once we're redeemed, to teach us and to build us in the image of his Son, so that we are like him. Keep reading. Because that, actually, this passage, the verse we just read first, is probably one of the most reassuring verses that there are in Scripture. Because whom we did foreknow, we did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. He knows all the people that are ever going to get saved. Not that he's choosing arbitrarily, but God knows who's going to accept him and who's not. And whom he knows, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Anyone who gets saved is going to be like Christ eventually. God's not going to give up until they are. And he says, whom he foreknew, he predestinated to be conformed to the image of his Son. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, he called. That's salvation. Whom he called, them he also justified. Whom he justified, them he also glorified. He kept working on them until they had a glorified body and they were sinless and perfect, just like Christ is. How's he going to do that? What shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He that spared not his own Son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him freely give us also in all things? Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifies. Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of the Father, who also maketh intercession for us. So he said, hey, the only person that can ever make an accusation against us is our judge, is the one who died for us. So we don't have to worry about that, but just keep reading. What shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. Now hang on. Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? Does that seem like someone that's a conqueror? Someone going through famine, nakedness, peril, sword, being held to some sword point, being enslaved like Joseph? That's actually not something we would consider to be a conqueror. But God's using that to make us like him. He always has his own purposes and his own reasons. And the trick is we have to learn to start looking for his reasons. Not the reasons of the people. Because remember, what did Joseph tell his brethren? You meant it to be for evil. God meant it for good, to save much people alive. The people that are doing wrong to you probably don't know why God's allowing it. But the reason we have to ask ourselves is look for God's hand and say, okay, Lord, you're allowing this to happen to me. Why? What do you want me to learn? Or what do you want me to show? How do you want me to bless other people so that I can become more like you and use even the bad things that happen to me to be a benefit to others? That's what Jesus did, and that's what God expects us to do. Go to last verse, James. Chapter 1, verse 2. It says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. He said it's a good thing when we fall into troubles, when we fall into that word temptation here isn't necessarily temptation to sin, but it's trials, it's bad things that happen to us. And James says it's a good thing, because that'll teach us patience, and patience will have a perfect word that can be complete and entire, wanting nothing. God allows these things to not only bring us into the image of his Son, just like he says in Romans 8, just like he showed with Joseph, just like he did with Christ. And we need to learn to look and say, Lord, what's your reason for allowing whatever this is? Because troubles are going to come. We're all going to have our share of troubles. And if we look for God and say, look at the last verse, next one. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Say, Lord, let me see what you're trying to let me learn through this thing, rather than getting mad at people that are doing wrong to us. They very well may mean to do wrong. Or it may seem like the universe is out to get you. But if we look to God and say, God, you're allowing this for a reason, for my benefit, because you love me, to save much people alive, to redeem people, how are you trying to use this to benefit me, or to help me be a blessing to other people?